All right, welcome to population for the world's people. Okay, so picture this. You live in Mexico City, one of the largest and most crowded cities in the world. And you realize just how crowded it is whenever you ride the subway at rush hour. So you love the excitement of living in a big city, and there's always something interesting to do. However, at the same time, the city has a lot of crime, there's heavy traffic, and it pollutes the air. So population is what we were talking about, is an important part of geographers' work. So many geographers are interested in where people live, how many people live there, and what effects those people have on resources and the environment. So you don't have to write this down, but this is the big idea. The main ideas is that the study of population patterns helps geographers learn about the world, and the population statistics and trends are important measures of population change. So that is what we're going to look at today. Okay, so let's talk about patterns. So, because population has a huge impact on our lives, it is an important part of geography. And geographers study such information as how many people live in an area, why they live there, and how populations change. So population patterns like these can tell us much about our world. So population patterns, specifically population density. Some places on Earth are really crowded with people, though others are almost empty. And one statistic that geographers use to examine populations is population density, which is a measure of the number of people living in an area. So population density is expressed as persons per square mile or square kilometer. I would remember that. Persons per square mile. So population density provides us with important information about a place. The more people per square mile in a region, the more crowded or dense it is. For example, Japan has a population density of 880 people per square mile. That is a high population density. In many parts of Japan, people are crowded together in large cities, and space is very limited. Why? Because Japan is an island, or several of them. However, in contrast, Australia has a very low population density. Only about 6 people per square mile live there. So that indicates that Australia has many wide open spaces with very few people. So how does population density affect life in a particular place? So places with high population densities, the land is often expensive, roads are crowded, and buildings tend to be taller. So if there's less space, you can't build out, so you have to build up. When I was in Hong Kong, not only the geography was difficult because it's an island and there's mountains, but there's a ton of people who live in Hong Kong. So the main living arrangement is apartment living. On the other hand, places with low population densities tend to have more open spaces, less traffic, and more available land. So I'm going to show you a map in just a minute that has a specific country and its population density. Okay, so, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. So when an area is thinly populated, it is often because the land does not provide a very good life, i.e. resources. So these areas might have rugged mountains or deserts where people can't grow crops. Some areas may be frozen all year long, making survival there very, very difficult. So areas with denser populations tend to be regions with fertile soil, reliable sources of water, and a very good agricultural climate. So let's look at this next slide here. So questions that you can ask yourself when you're looking at a population density map, such as this of China. You can see that there are not very many people in western China, so it begs the question, what's the geography like there? Can you guess? So what geographic features would prohibit people from living in this particular area in the West? And why are there so many people in the red zone? I think some of that could be answered by looking at the map. So let's look at a physical map compared to the population density on the next slide. Alright, so in the West, what geographic features are there that would prohibit people from living there? Oh, look, it's a desert. Also, the Himalaya mountains are there, and the Altun Shan and the Tian Shan. These are mountain ranges. Himalayas have the highest peaks in the world. Difficult to live in. On the other hand, if you look at the east, you're going to see the North China Plain, the Sichuan Basin, Manchurian Plain. These are ripe with great river sources, water sources, i.e. crops. So you're going to find most of your development where the resources are plentiful. Okay, so the study of population is actually much more important than you might realize. The number of people living in an area affects all elements of life, such as the availability of housing and jobs, and whether hospitals and schools open or close, even the amount of available food. So geographers track changes in populations by examining important statistics, i.e. numbers. They also study the movement of people and analyzing population trends. So let's take a look at statistics and trends that measure population change. So geographers examine 3 key statistics to learn about population changes. These statistics are important for studying a country's population over time. Those being birth rate, death rate, and the rate of natural increase. So births add to a population, obviously, and then deaths obviously subtract from it. So the annual number of births per 1,000 people is called the birth rate. Similarly, the death rate is the annual number of deaths per 1,000 people. So the birth rate minus the death rate equals the percentage of natural increase, or the rate at which a population is changing. So here's an example. Denmark has a rate of natural increase of 0.05%. This means it has slightly more births than deaths and a very slight population increase. Birth rate 15 per 1,000 and death rate 8 per 1,000. So 15 minus 8 is 7, but that's over 1,000 people. So it's 0.7% rate of increase. So whatever country this is looking at, it's actually has a slightly more natural rate of increase than Denmark does. Population growth rates differ from one place to another, and in some countries populations are growing very slowly or even shrinking. So many countries in Europe and North America have very low rates of natural increase. In Russia, for example, the birth rate is about 10.8%, or 10.8, and the death rate is 16.1. So what does that tell you? It's a negative rate of natural increase, and the population is shrinking. So then geographers are going to be like, okay, so why is the population shrinking? And they're going to go check that out. In most countries around the world, however, populations are growing. Mali, for example, has a rate of natural increase of about 3.3%. And that sounds really small, but it actually means that Mali's population is expected to double in only 21 years. That's extremely high. So high population growth rates can pose some serious problems or challenges, and governments are going to try to provide enough jobs, education, and medical care for their rapidly growing populations. Okay, so let's look at some population trends, and you can see the difference there. So Democratic Republic of Congo is actually experiencing rapid growth, whereas the United States is very slow growth. And then there's actually negative growth in Germany. So in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there are more people being born than there are dying. In the United States, it's, I want to say relatively equal, but it just slightly more births than deaths. And then in Germany, according to this graph, there's more people dying than being born. So remember, birth rate, death rate, natural increase. All right, so let's talk about population change. Probably the most common cause of population change is migration. So migration is the process of moving from one place to live in another. And as one country loses citizens as a result of migration, its population can decline. So maybe that's why Russia's population is declining. I don't know. At the same time, another country may gain population as people settle there. Okay. So what are the reasons for that? Some factors push people to leave a country, while other factors pull or attract people to a new country. Warfare, a lack of good farmland are common push factors. For example, during the Irish potato famine of the mid-1800s, poverty and disease forced 1.5 million people to leave Ireland. So opportunities for a better life often pull people to new countries. Another example is in the 1800s and early 1900s, thousands of British citizens migrated to Australia in search of cheap land. All right, so let's talk about world population trends over a long period of time. So in the last 200 years, Earth's population has exploded. So for thousands of years, the world population growth was relatively low and steady. So about 2,000 years ago, the world had some 300 million people. That's like just under the population of the United States today. 300 million people. Compared to the land we have, that's not a lot of people. But by 1800, there were almost 1 billion people. And since 1800, better health care and improved food production have supported tremendous population growth. In 2012, the world's population passed 7 billion people, and I know for a fact we're past that. We're over 8 billion people now. So population trends are an important part of the study of the world's people. Two important population trends are clear. The first trend indicates that the population growth in some of the more industrialized nations, like the United States and Europe and Australia and Japan, they are slowing their population growth. So a second trend indicates that less industrialized countries, like Nigeria and Bangladesh, often have high growth rates. So these trends affect a country's workforce and their government aid. So take a look at this next graph here. So these are the world population and growth rate starting around 1050. And you can see that, yes, it's increasing, but very slightly. And that's because we were generally, let's say, since the beginning of time, we were a hunting and gathering society, and that kept population numbers low. But as technology increased, probably starting around the Renaissance and Reformation age from Europe, it's around probably around 1400 is when it really started to increase. But if you look at 1850, that was the Industrial Revolution in the United States and in Europe. And we were able to produce massive amounts of food and figured out that there were germs around and that we needed to wash our hands, so that helped us live longer, basically, is what it is. So an increase in technology and food and better health care allowed for the huge increase of our population. So what's that going to do to our resources eventually? Think about it. The end.